Welcome back to Knowledge Drop, the podcast where we talk about science, technology, engineering, and all the good things that make us all happy and stuff. I'm Derek.
And I'm Erik.
We have another guest speaker. Hayden is out of the country right now, enjoying some much needed time with his family. And so I've invited my good friend Erik to come on and talk to us. So Erik, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and, how we met and stuff.
All right. Yeah. So I'm, roughly in my early third year at ASU. I'm studying mechanical engineering. Before I came to ASU, I was in the Marine Corps for 5 years. I was a airframe mechanic on Super Stallion helicopters for 5 years. And
nice.
Now that kind of just piqued my interest in all things mechanical. And so now I decided to use my GI Bill to get a degree in mechanical engineering.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. Yeah, I'm glad to have you on. We've been chatting. So this year at ASU, it's been almost all online. And so naturally, all the students have organized Discord servers so that we can help each other with all the classwork we have. And, there's the occasional couple days long rants about various things, but yeah, that's where Erik and I met. We were taking a class together, and we started doing homework together, and it's been good. I mean, yeah. I didn't do too well in the class, but that wasn't his fault. That's more my fault. But
yeah, man, it's quite the class.
Yeah, if anyone's curious, we're taking engineering mechanics with a focus on dynamics, so moving bodies, and it's a doozy. So anyway, to get down to it, we're going to be talking today about cryptocurrency. Not too much into our regular topics, but this is very interesting, and there is a lot of technology involved in this. And I have the fun fact today. And it's not so much related to this, but I thought it was really, really cool when I came across it. So I'm not sure if Erik already knows this, but on this surface of Mars, the atmosphere is like 1% as thick as what is here on Earth.
Oh, wow.
And so it's super, super thin. And so because it's so thin, there's not a lot of insulation to hold in heat. And that's why there's ice everywhere. And because it's so thin, the temperature is changing based on elevation, just like it does on Earth. The higher you go, the colder it gets. On Mars, the temperature difference at your feet and your head is so at your feet, it would be 24 degrees Celsius or 75 degrees Fahrenheit. But at your head, it would be 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, just in the difference of like 6 feet.
That's insane.
And I thought that was so cool to think about that. Like, hey, I can have liquid water and then I can just pull it up to like head level and it'll freeze.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
So,
wow.
But I guess it would be frozen on depending on the season, whatever. But that's my my fun factor for today.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah. So anyway, jumping into cryptocurrency. We've all heard of it. Bitcoin is normally the thing that we hear most about. It's kind of the thing that is getting super hyped right now. And yeah, Erik and I are both going to be going kind of back and forth on this because there was a lot to dive into.
It's a lot to cover. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
a lot of interesting stuff.
Yeah. So while we both researched it, we're going to both be talking about the different points that we were researching because we both kind of did our independent research, and we're going to be teaching each other today. So.
All right. I guess I can start a little bit about specifically just Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so again, I'm trying to treat this in a very, I'm not an expert. The stuff that I'm going to be talking about is kind of just stuff that I've established for my own research, but I am by no means an expert on any of this.
Yeah, any returning listener or new listener should know anything we say here is not we're not engineers yet, we're not experts, and so it's just for fun, just for learning's sake.
Right. So that being said, from what I've gathered, Bitcoin seems to be the oldest established cryptocurrency dating back to 2009. Currently, there are over 7,000 other alternate types of cryptocurrencies, though.
Yikes.
Which is really just maddening to think
Yeah,
about.
that
I mean,
sounds
obviously,
bonkers.
Yeah. So if you think about it just in the sense of, just like different currencies that are available all over the world, I'd gather there's quite a few, but
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
7,000, that's pretty nuts to me. And as far as Bitcoin specifically, at the time of recording this in, late 2020, we have quote unquote mined, and we'll come back to this idea of mining, but at the time of recording, there's roughly 18.5 million Bitcoins in circulation. The estimate, well, it's not an estimate, I guess the way that Bitcoin is written and the programming that goes into it, there's going to be a set number of 21 million total Bitcoins at the end. So
yeah,
in a sense, we've quote unquote mined 90% of the available Bitcoins that will be circulating as a form of currency.
Yeah, this is something that I've talked to a few people about cryptocurrency, because it's like they think that because it's digital, we can just make however much we want, and it's just going to be this like infinite money machine.
Yeah, yeah.
But the way the world works is if something just has an infinite amount, it's not worth anything.
No, exactly. Yeah, which is that's something I came across when I was researching this topic. I don't remember entirely how the quote went, but Voltaire had a quote that was similar to that. And I guess it was the idea that, what's that?
What's Voltaire?
Voltaire was he was an early philosopher. I don't remember the specific year.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. I didn't know if it was like a company or whatnot.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, it was like an early philosopher. And he had a quote talking about this, how, like if you have, it was kind of along the lines of like fiat currency, which we'll get to later in this, but he was talking about how, if you have a money that a paper currency, like a fiat currency, where it's not backed by, gold or something physical, it will always return to its intrinsic value, which is zero over time,
Yeah, that makes sense, because the more that you print of it, it's going to be worth less, even if it is backed by something, because the value has to be divided out more and more.
Yeah.
Which is scary to think about, because I talk about this later, the fact that this year in America, they're printing a lot of money, and it's gonna, like, there are a lot of financial policies and stuff that regulate that, but it will eventually catch up to us in the form of inflation.
Oh yeah.
So yeah. So what else did you learn just about like the history of crypto and Bitcoin specifically?
So the other thing cool that I found out about Bitcoin was that in the really early stages of it, like roughly from 2009 to 2011, there was this so-called Carboniferous period for Bitcoin. So basically, do a little bit of history here. The Carboniferous period was roughly 300 to 360 million years ago. And it was this huge period of green growth on Earth where there was tons and tons of like plant life forming. But there was nothing or almost nothing around to eat all this growth. And so it basically became this period of like huge resources being established and developed, but they were getting wasted and lost because there was no way for them to be utilized in a sense.
Yeah, like there's no one to harvest the wood, there's no one to reap the fruit. Like that's really interesting. Yeah, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, so basically during those really early years of Bitcoin from like 2009 to 2011, when there was just a big chunk of the mining going on, there was so little maybe demand's not the right word, but basically there was a huge influx of this new cryptocurrency that was being established. But there was almost no one to use it. So it was kind of just, it became wasted. It got kind of buried and lost in the blockchain and the ledgers.
Yeah. So, which is also something I want to talk about, this blockchain, because I think it's an interesting technology. So to add to the history of what you've talked about, I went a little bit deeper into like crypto in general. And so like, I there was an early attempt at a cryptocurrency in the early 80s, which I thought was crazy to think about.
Oh yeah.
And it was a guy who relocated to the Netherlands because apparently they have some very pro company, policies.
Mm-hmm.
And so he started this company called DigiCash, and they were operating for a little while, but then for some reason, I didn't get too into the weeds on this, but the government, the Netherlands government, stepped in and basically destroyed the company because they didn't like what they were doing, or they didn't like the idea of like a
Yeah.
decentralized currency. Um,
Hmm.
and so in the late 1990s is when this company failed because DigiCash had to change their business plan and their business operations so they could only cater to banks. And no
Really?
banks are wanting to do cryptocurrency. I mean, they're barely doing it now. And
Yeah.
so,
That's interesting. Yeah, because that was something I had also considered, was just, I guess, this idea that um, whether or not cryptocurrency is something that could be, I guess, controlled or banned by specific governments or entities. So
mhm.
that's interesting. Yeah.
I think where they went wrong though is because DigiCash was not decentralized like it is now.
Mm-hmm.
The way it worked was it was basically just a bank in the Netherlands. Like they had a physical location where they stored all this information, which
I
is the whole
see.
point of
Yeah.
crypto.
Yeah, you're right.
And
That's a bit different than the approach to it now, where it's just buried in so many layers of anonymity,
yeah,
in a sense.
and so like just as for context, the way that it works now, I don't know if you'll talk about this later, but this is what I was looking into as well.
Mm-hmm.
Part of blockchain is just a way to keep a record of everything. It's a ledger system, like you mentioned before,
Yeah.
and it's stored by every network that's using cryptocurrency.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if all of the nations of the world, which is highly unlikely, if all of them teamed up, it would still be immensely difficult to track down every single network and shut it down.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
that's the huge plus to cryptos because nobody can control it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think, to me, something that's really interesting about crypto is uh so like we were just talking about with like the blockchain kind of ledger system, and just the way that it's tracked is, you know, every purchase of Bitcoin or just cryptocurrency in general, it is um, it has a layer of anonymity to it, because like
Mm-hmm.
it's not like when you trade a cryptocurrency, you're not doing so through a specific bank or financial entity. It's kind of just account to account, and
Mm-hmm.
so there's not always like a face on it per se.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, like although it's encrypted, there is this record system, right? So it's like even though you may not have a face on a specific interaction you've had with somebody, the records are there.
Yeah.
And I just think that's kind of an interesting approach to it.
Yeah. And so just going back to more of the history slash like how it works, you've mentioned mining cryptocurrency.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was still a teenager when this was kind of big. Um, but when people started talking about mining Bitcoin, I was fascinated that like you can set up your computer to just kind of run through a bunch of calculations and you eventually find Bitcoins or you get these things. That's not technically how it works, but in a nutshell, yes.
Yeah.
So how it does actually work is there are people who have these computers that are optimized for computing, running a
Mm-hmm.
lot of algorithms and checking things. What happens is this computer will make sure that a transaction is correct, that it's right, and that it's being transferred from one to another, and they get a payment for processing that transaction basically. Um, and they also are like some of the first people to find these newly minted coins, because there's only so many, and the key, or the way to identify a specific coin, a key, is only so many characters and so many numbers. Like there's a string of characters to it that they are testing for and looking for. And it's super, super energy intensive. I think you actually were the one that you were telling me about this a couple weeks ago, that there are companies that have like underwater, or like they have like these rigs set up in caves for heat management and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah. That is something I thought was really interesting about that, is that there are companies that have made it, their specific purpose is to just have huge networks of computing capability that they'll use to run through these blockchain verifications as a way of, mining or verifying the data. But yeah, there was something, sorry, I just had a quick note that I wrote down that was relevant to what we were talking about here.
No, you're good. Yeah. Feel free to interrupt me. That's
what we do. Sorry. So something that was interesting to me that I came across earlier was just that, we just talked about like how there's companies that have these huge, server sort of setups, all this computing power as a way of verifying purchases to, quote unquote, mine Bitcoins. But from what I was also looking into on this topic is that because there's lots of different competing computers in the system that are trying to verify these purchases, as more computers are accessing this network that they're trying to, sort of like crack the code on, or like solve the puzzle in order to get that little Bitcoin piece. Basically, the more computers that are competing, the harder the puzzle gets in a sense. So it's almost set up in a way to sort of just completely randomize the validation, to basically sort of prevent people from doing what these companies are trying to do, where they just have like massive computer setups to just
farms and computers that do this stuff.
Yeah. So it's almost like the system set up in a way to really try and work against that. So I haven't really looked into it enough to, to speak educatedly about if that process is something that they've been able to overcome. But yeah, that's sort of how it's intended.
Yeah. Cause I was looking into like, so what you could do, you could have your computer running when you're not using it to look for and run these transactions and look for Bitcoin. I was looking into it, and it is like, it's hard on your computer.
Oh yeah.
And so, the people that are doing this, I think there might be a better system, because like you're saying, it is almost built for the people who have money already. Because if I can buy like a super optimized supercomputer that can just run all the time, that's liquid cooled and all that, then they're going to be more successful than my, dinky little desktop that I bought at Costco.
Yeah.
And so I hope that's the case, but
yeah. Yeah, I'd hope so too. That's something interesting I came across that I thought was just neat, because that kind of, it kind of goes against like what we were talking about with just either people or companies that just have set up these like crazy networks. So it kind of begs the question, like, is what they're doing really worth the effort they're putting in? But yeah, I guess, again, that's something I haven't really looked into, but maybe that's a cool topic for further research.
Yeah, no, for sure. We'll add that to our list. Another little snippet of cool stuff I found was, so the person who's like quote unquote credited with founding Bitcoin, we don't actually know who that is. There was a person who posted a paper about Bitcoin, Mr. Nakamoto. But that's all we know. We don't know who he is or what he's done. And it's kind of funny. I read I didn't get too into this because I don't really care for conspiracy theories, but there's a conspiracy theory out there that Elon Musk is this person, that he was the one that started Bitcoin. And I would just laugh so hard if it was, but I thought that was pretty funny.
Do you know what year that paper was published in?
It was 2008. So like it was
Okay.
right at the cusp of when it became popular because he published this paper about it. And then people discovered Bitcoin and what it was and how they could make money. And that's when, like you were talking about the Carboniferous.
Yeah.
Is that how you say it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when that whole period started, when there's just this immense growth in the interest of the currency. So
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah.
I'm guessing. So, okay, was that something that he, uh, when he published that, do you know anything about, like, is that something that he was specifically trying to keep, like to his own country, or like, is that something that he was trying to display like to the world basically? Or
Honestly, I think it would be to the world, because it doesn't make sense to have a cryptocurrency that's just isolated to one region or to one native people. Like one, like if it was English, only so many people would access it.
You're totally right. That sort of does go against everything that cryptocurrency is about.
Yeah. So because it works better the more people that use it.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, yeah, this is all kind of what we've been researching. There's a ton more that goes into it. Like blockchain in and of itself is like a crazy technology that's amazing, and I want to understand it more.
Yeah.
But
yeah, you could easily have an entire episode of this just about that specific sector.
Yeah, I actually added it to the list of topics because it's
nice.
Really cool.
Yeah.
And so now we've kind of established like what it is, how it works. I mean, very surface level stuff. But now we both kind of created this list of like why it's a good thing and why it's a bad thing. And so maybe we'll just go point for point and talk about each point. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I can go first. I can talk a little bit about it. So I think just something cool to note to start here is just at the time of recording, I picked out just a few different prices for some of the popular cryptocurrencies now. Just if nothing else, I thought it would be interesting to see how they continue to change,
Yeah.
So like at the time of recording, one Bitcoin is $18,856. One Ethereum coin is $576. XRP, also known as Ripple, it's currently 59 cents. And Litecoin is $80.45. And these are all US dollar conversion rates.
I've never heard of Ripple before. I wonder why it's so cheap right now.
It's a smaller one. It's one that I've purchased a little bit of myself, but that's kind of more than anything as sort of an experiment. I have invested a little bit into crypto, but not a whole lot. It's kind of just an experiment at the moment for me.
Yeah, same here. I've just barely gotten into crypto like the last 4 or 5 months. But sadly, just as a warning to everybody, if you buy Bitcoin and you don't receive a key, like a string of numbers and letters, then you're not actually buying cryptocurrency. So for example, I use Robinhood to do most of my investing. But when you buy Bitcoin on Robinhood, you're not actually buying a Bitcoin. You're buying a derivative of Bitcoin, something that Robinhood tracks. Because when you buy Bitcoin, you're not actually receiving the numeric key that you can put in your digital wallet that says you own that, specific part of a coin or whole coin or whatever it is. And so something to look out for.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I'll, I guess, sort of going away from the current prices and stuff. So to talk about why it could be a good thing, let's see. Basically, every transaction of a cryptocurrency is sort of shrouded by this element of anonymity and or a lack of involvement from an outside entity. So in a sense, like I guess the easiest example I can think of would be, you need a bicycle. So you go onto Craigslist and you find Joe Smith who's selling a bicycle, and you decide that you're going to purchase it from him using Bitcoin. So, you guys both have some sort of crypto app. you trade over $100 worth of Bitcoin to him, and then, that bike's now yours. And so that transaction you performed, that was without any sort of involvement from, a financial institution. So it's not like you did that
including the U.S. government.
Wells Fargo. Right. Yeah. So it's not something where, both your bank accounts talk to one another, and then the difference of funds was then subtracted and added. It was something entirely different through just this blockchain, ledger system, which I think is cool. I think it's really interesting that, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general really offer, they offer you the ability to perform a transaction with other people where it's not necessarily, processed through a government or through a financial institution.
So
I guess
my next question is like, can you, so I don't know about the process of paying someone with Bitcoin that well. So does that mean like if I have a part of a Bitcoin and I want to give someone the $100 equivalent of a Bitcoin, do I just like send them a code, or like, do I text them a code, or is it through like a website or?
Yeah. So I think it would have to be through a website. This is not something I've done myself yet. This is, kind of uncharted territory
gotcha.
for me. But from my understanding, the way it would work is, whatever you're using for your crypto trading, whether it's, Coinbase or Cash App or whatever you're choosing, once you work through the necessary like validation steps through that crypto trading service you're using, I believe it then allows you to trade with other people.
Gotcha. Okay. So then there's still some amount of like, I guess you don't need to know. Sorry, I'm like trying to figure out, because I want to make sure that like, I'm not trying to be nefarious or anything, but like, if I want to be 100% anonymous, how do I give someone this money without having to like basically register myself on a website or something?
Right. So I think, so that's kind of where, in the world of crypto, that sort of anonymity is sacrificed a little bit, is when you're signing up with the institution that you're choosing to do your crypto transactions with. Because I believe there's really no way to get around them knowing your specific, other bank name and account number and all that. But when it comes to crypto transactions specifically, as far as I understand, that's where you're still able to sort of be shrouded in this, gotcha, finite secrecy.
Okay. So it's more so about the fact that the coin itself that's logging every transfer and every transaction, it doesn't name who owned it at this time. It just says that it was transferred from this account to this account to this account.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I believe that's why, when there's been issues with criminals, the FBI has been able to specifically, locate that, like the time that transfer took place, the amount that the transfer was for, and things like that.
Yeah. That's actually one of the bad things about cryptocurrency is that like governments in general, there are good reasons the government can seize money and track money. There's also bad reasons. Like for example, like if I live in a country where it's communist, if I don't agree with what's happening, the government can seize all of my money or freeze my accounts just because that's the nature of the government where I live. But if I have cryptocurrency, they can't just reach in and freeze my funds or take them or whatever.
You're right. Yeah. Like, but in then a sense, cryptocurrency, I'm sorry, wasn't trying to
I was just going to say, on the flip side, we can use, like in the US and TV shows, we see all the time that we can put trackers and we can track serial numbers of money to track down criminals and make sure they're not, doing bad things. So.
Yeah. So that's something that's kind of interesting to me is like, I guess the idea that like, if I was a criminal, I don't think I would want to use cryptocurrency because it's something that, although, my face and name isn't like attached to it per se, there is sort of this like chain that can be traced in a way, which is different than like, I don't know, if you were a criminal and you were just dealing in, you know, paper money only, where that's sort of can't exactly be tracked in the same way.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's an interesting idea. I mean, we're not criminals, so we don't really know a ton about it, but yeah. So so while I did list, you know, the fact that it's not regulated by governments in the bad column, I also put not regulated by governments in the good column. So I mentioned it before, but like we've been doing, it's been really hard for a lot of people, and so there's been money distributed to people for, you know, the hardships that we're enduring this year with the virus. But the money wasn't, you know, taken from somewhere else and given to everyone. It was just created. It's just like a lot of people on YouTube joke about this money printing machine.
Yeah, like a money machine gun.
A money machine gun. Yeah. So the government, they have all these like very interesting policies on like, oh, we're going to print all this money, but we'll be able to buy government bonds. And so in the future, we'll be able to do this. And it kind of evens all out. And for me as a layman and not versed in that financial stuff, it just seems like a big runaround for them being like, we're just going to make this money and we'll justify it later.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Act now, think later.
Yeah. And it's, for me, seeing that and not understanding it because it's so complex, it makes me kind of afraid, because stuff like that leads to like inflation.
Oh yeah.
If you've ever been to like a third world country, a lot of times they've gone through these hyperinflation moments in their history where, like in Zimbabwe, a friend of mine showed me a dollar bill that was for 12 billion. I can't remember the name of the currency, but it was a dollar bill with, you know, 9 zeros on it. And I was like, whoa, you're a rich man. And he's like, no. This barely buys you like a loaf of bread.
Yeah.
You know, something simple. And so the fact that cryptocurrency is very limited, like what you've said, it's a finite resource, and it's not because the maker of it is controlling how many there are. The code that makes Bitcoin what it is limits the number that can actually exist.
Yeah, exactly. And that's from what I've looked into, that's almost true for all of them. I don't know the specific names of cryptocurrencies that don't have a cap on them, but you're right. The overwhelming majority of cryptocurrencies, they have this cap on them. So there's not just going to be this huge volume to the point where the value is then diminished.
Yeah. And so the other thing I was thinking is, if there's only so many of them and they can only be worth so much, why does the price fluctuate so much? And then I was thinking about it, and I was, it's just the same thing as, you know, when the new Power Rangers toy came out, everyone wanted it and the price shot up because of demand. Exactly. It's the same thing with Bitcoin is, you know, when everyone wants it, there's going to be less of it, and the stuff that's left over is going to be more expensive because there's leftovers. So it's kind of doubly based on the fact that there's only so much, and the amount of people that are actually using it makes what the price of it is. Oh yeah, definitely. Just because, I mean, even I remember like when I was first looking into Bitcoin in like 2017, I think it had a price point of around, I don't know, something around the ballpark of like 1,500 per Bitcoin. And now it's shot up all the way to, you know, 19,000. Yeah. Yeah. You know, they're even speculating, you know, heavy emphasis on speculating, but they're estimating the price could even go into the 6 figures by the time we're done mining all the Bitcoins. See, I heard it was going to be 6 figures by the end of next year. Wow. But then again, this is just speculation. Yeah. Because another website told me that we shouldn't finish mining Bitcoin until the middle of the next century. Really? And I was like, whoa, that sounds like a long time, considering there's going to be more and more computers that are going to be more and more powerful that can, you know, do these things. So yeah. Anyway, just Yeah.
Well, I wonder if now, not to tangent too much, but I wonder if that's because we're at a point now where we're sort of like scraping the barrel, you know, because we've already mined so many Bitcoins. Like I wonder
Oh,
if
true.
as you get closer to that cap, if that means that it's intrinsically more difficult to then harvest the
That would be
remaining
interesting.
Bitcoins.
Yeah. So it becomes more of like you can't really, I don't know if there's a science to finding Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
but I imagine it just being like gold, where like if we had just mined every ounce of gold from the earth and it just becomes harder and harder to find.
Yeah.
That would be a cool feature, I guess, of
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin. And we're only focusing on Bitcoin because it's the most common. Like that's what
Yeah.
everyone kind of is in right now.
Yeah. It's sort of easier to just use that as an example for all of them.
Yeah.
Because it is, I mean, from the way I understand it, it is the, you know, the model that most of these other cryptocurrencies have used in their development as well.
So the last point that I have for like why it's a good thing is so the people that are mining Bitcoin, they are paid for the service of, you know, making sure the transactions are correct and right, and they keep a good log of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning they're incentivized to keep a correct, up-to-date record of everything. If they don't, then they don't get paid, meaning they are self-interested and they self-regulate. And this is huge because that means that, like, let's just say I run a cryptocurrency transaction monitoring group of computers or whatever, a server.
Mm-hmm.
If I try to, you know, steal or I try to do bad things, no one they'll stop using my server, or like I need to read more into it, but like the people who are funneling that I'm looking for Bitcoin and looking for these transactions, if I don't have good records, I'm not a part of that system anymore.
Hmm.
And I
You
thought that
kind of
was
get cut
really
off.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
That like there are not very many self-regulating systems that can actually self-regulate.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really impressed with that aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.
But there are a few more downsides. I think you have a few, or another one that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. I mean, there's sort of just one specific, you know, circumstance that I kind of wanted to focus on just as an anecdote for how
Mm-hmm.
it could be a bad thing, I guess. Which sort of goes back to this idea of the fact that it is shrouded in anonymity,
Mm-hmm.
makes it often appealing to criminals and hackers. Specifically, there's this one sort of like story or occurrence that I'm, you know, kind of fascinated by. I've done a little bit of research on this already, like prior to this, but there's the creation of this online anonymous marketplace called the Silk Road, that was created by Ross Ulbricht, but he went under the alias of Dread Pirate Roberts.
Mm-hmm.
So it was created. It started in 2011, early 2011, and it's resurfaced here and there a few times, but
Mm-hmm.
the initial shutdown happened in October of 2013. And so basically, the Silk Road was it was a dark web marketplace that was only accessible through an encrypted network system called I think it was called Tor, Tor. It's this sort of
Mm-hmm. I've heard of it. I don't know
yeah.
much.
So
I don't know much about it.
exactly. I'm not going to get too in depth on it because I'm not really educated enough to really describe the ins and outs of it. But it's sort of this like program that you have to download separately. And then once you download this program, it allows you to access these like sort of encrypted web pages. And anyway, that's how people were using and how people came across the Silk Road.
Okay.
And so it's basically this huge online anonymous marketplace where you could buy everything from, you know, illegal substances to goods and services, like having fake IDs printed for you,
Mm-hmm.
account information for, you know, Netflix,
Credit
Amazon Prime.
cards, you know,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Sky's the limit. The sky is really the limit. And so it was designed by this guy named Ross Ulbricht, who went by the Dread Pirate Roberts. And, you know, obviously there's no denying that there is a lot of controversy around this. But
Sure,
something I thought was really important about Ross Ulbricht was like, he was an educated guy. You know, he had a bachelor's, he had a Bachelor of Science from UT Dallas in physics. And he was in the process of working on a master's degree program where he was studying material science and engineering.
Hey.
So this was not some entirely like, you know, just sort of like crackpot dude who was just had his tinfoil hat on. Like, he was an educated guy.
Interesting.
And without getting into the specifics too much of the story of like his trial and his incarceration, Ross was involved in basically an elaborate, huge Bitcoin scam. He got scammed for lots of money, something to the tune of, you know, the ballpark of $1 million in Bitcoin. It was huge. And it also involved nobody actually got murdered, but it involved the intended murder of two men. Basically, Ross he was talking with somebody who, under his understanding, was a member of like, I think the Hells Angels or something. Basically, he was trying to hire a hitman that he was going to have take out these two individuals that had wronged him and that were in his way. So the thing I think is so interesting about the Silk Road story, and the reason I'm not trying to tangent too much, but the reason I brought it up is it's interesting how, you know, you've got this guy who he decided to create this huge anonymous marketplace. And I feel like he really just went power hungry, you know, like he
absolutely.
I feel like once he realized just the scale and the scope of what it was that he was creating, and he realized how much of an empire he could establish, it kind of got the best of him, you know?
Yeah. What's funny, this is my nerd moment. When you mentioned that, it made me think of Sauron. Or sorry, it made me think of Sauron from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So like, he used to be the White Wizard. He's this immensely educated person. And he thought that he could control the ring and use it for good. He wanted to use his knowledge for good, and he got too deep and he became this evil person. It corrupted him. And I just recently read a little snippet of article or something on Facebook or Instagram or something about that. And that exactly makes like that exactly fits for Ross Ulbricht.
Yeah. It's totally a parallel there.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So that's something just really cool that I've came across that in the past. And I don't know, I can't help it. That's just stories like that I get fascinated by.
Oh, totally.
When I just think about like the societal impact of stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a question I wanted to pose for you, is just like, when you think about the story of the Silk Road, like, do you think that the Silk Road directly indicates a problem with cryptocurrency itself? Or do you think it's simply, you know, a fault of the technological tools like the dark web and the encrypted, you know, transactions and all that?
So that's a really good question. My dad sent me an article kind of about this, where there's this really large disconnect between the people in Silicon Valley and the people in DC, the people who make the technology and the people who create laws to protect us from the downsides of technology. Because there's always another side to the coin. The example I always tell people is like drones. Drones are so cool and so fun. But on the flip side, my dad was telling me that the military had trouble because commercial drones were able to, bad people in the Middle East were using drones to deliver explosives onto bases without anybody looking. It was just this little drone that just drops in whenever it needs to. And so that was something we didn't think about when we created drones. And so we're having to kind of deal with that. And I think it's the same thing with any new technology, is there's an adjustment period where we introduce it and it's really cool and really amazing. But then someone's like, hey, I could use this for, you know, name your nefarious reason. And it just takes some adjustment period. Like the same thing goes for social media. I think we're in the midst of this right now, that social media was introduced and it's amazing and so much fun and cool. But then we also didn't think about a lot of the consequences that are coming. We think a lot more about our image, and there's a lot more suicide. And we're in this time where we're trying to correct for that. Like if you look there, social media is not regulated at all. And it's interesting because like any other new technology, like drones, it's getting to the point where you almost need a FAA license to fly a drone. And that kind of regulation, while it's not fun to be regulated. I'm going to be honest. It's not fun to like be told you can't do something when you live in a place where you should be able to do anything. But there needs to be like a baseline amount of regulation that keeps the majority of people safe. And so I think that's just like, yes, the Silk Road is a horrible, horrible thing, but it's just something that we need to learn from and, you know, regulate and do better in the future.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what you were thinking as well.
I don't really know. I just wanted to see what you thought about it. I mean,
oh, gotcha.
I think, I don't know. It's really tough to say. I agree with your point as far as, you know, I also don't think that the Silk Road is something that's just explicitly evil per se, but it is definitely a service that allows, you know, people who wish to do wrong to do so more easily. But yeah, you know, it's really, like you said, it's really tough to figure out, you know, where do you draw the line in the sand? You know, because how do you decide what is, you know, what's right and what's wrong when you're dealing with an area like this where there is so much gray area?
Yeah. There's a topic that I have on the list of like talking about this kind of ethics of engineering specifically, because there's a lot of technology out there that can be used for good, but we have to think about the things that go into it, that how can we make sure that it's used in the way that we intend it. And if we want people just to have it open source, we need to be able to tell people, like governments or, you know, people in general, be aware that it could be used for XYZ thing. Do with that what you will. Because for me, I love open source. I love the idea of open source. And so like open source technology can be used for anything, good or bad. And so we need to make sure that it's made aware that like Bitcoin can be really good. You know, governments don't always know what to do or how to do it the best way. And so with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, taking them out of the equation and making it just kind of a very strict system where it's not just like I can bend to any one direction is really good. But yeah, we just have to be aware of the downside.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the thing that's so cool to me about it, to think about, is really just that, you know, having a system like cryptocurrency allows, like, it just takes the bank out of the equation, you know? So it's, you're no longer going to this gigantic institution to do your financial transactions. It's really a network based off of people like you and me.
Yeah.
And that's something I think is just really interesting about it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. One last thing that I want to mention is like a bad thing for cryptocurrency is it's kind of funny that I didn't find this as a downside specifically, partially it's a downside, but so because cryptocurrency is only digital, there's no physical substance to it. If there are some people that store it on like a flash drive, their digital wallet is stored in a flash drive. If that gets stolen, it's done. It's over.
Yeah.
Because someone can take that flash drive, open it up, transfer it to their account, throw away the flash drive, and it's gone. The other thing that is bad is because it's all on computers. Let's just say a giant solar flare from the sun wipes out computer networks.
Yeah.
I don't know if it could wipe out all of them, but man, it could wipe out a lot of them. If the computer that gets wiped is the one that stores your information, it's gone. However much money you have is gone. There's no insurance on it. And yeah, like, yes, it's not super likely that, you know, it could just crash or like a solar flare could happen, just crash. Or someone could steal it, but still it's something to be aware of.
Oh yeah. Well, that's something really that sort of leads into the very last negative point I had, which sort of what you were just describing really to me is sort of eerily similar to what can also happen with a fiat currency, just a typical government-backed paper currency like we have here in the US, which is that the value of that fiat currency is really only established because the government says it has value, So obviously, I don't think its collapse would necessarily happen in the same, like quick flash as like a solar flare getting rid of all your data on a flash drive or anything. Sure. But I guess what I mean is there's just as much potential or possibility for that paper currency to all of a sudden just completely plummet in value.
So I think I know what you're talking about. So in the 70s or 80s or whatever, we went away from the gold standard. And so the money that we have isn't actually backed by anything. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So in America, it used to be backed up by gold and silver. Like your dollar had an actual gold value.
Yeah.
And then America switched so that it doesn't have, like, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. It's just because the government says it has that specific value.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And like, even though that's at the moment not a problem per se for us here in the US, I mean, obviously we have inflation, but it's not like we're having a hard time paying for eggs and bread when we go to the store because we have a $10 bill that's not worth $10 all of a sudden.
Gotcha.
But it's interesting to me just because, the way that currency is established, a fiat paper currency, that's the same way that the currency is established in areas like you had mentioned, like third world countries like Venezuela, where they have just had insane inflation, where their dollar is just gotten infinitesimally small compared to what it used to be. And it's just, I guess, scary to think about how, that's also another quote unquote solar flare that could happen to sort of just diminish that value.
Well, and so maybe I'll talk a little bit more about my experience with inflation. So I lived in Ghana for a little while, and when I'd gotten there, the year before, they had like restructured their currency. So it was 2 cedis is what it's called for 1 American dollar.
Okay.
So it's a 2-to-1 ratio. But throughout my time there, it was being inflated a lot. And what was interesting was the people who had money were able to, how do I say this? Because you knew it was being devalued and inflated, you could take advantage of it before the prices caught up with the value of the money. And so if I knew that the value had inflated, so now it was like a 3-to-1, I could go to the store that day before prices had caught up and buy a bunch of stuff at 2-to-1. So my money was worth more at the store, even though it was worth less as a whole because the price hadn't caught up.
Right.
And it was a very like sad thing to see that there were people doing that because I should say I was able to do that because I wasn't aware of it at the time.
Right.
Like I wasn't trying to take advantage of the system there. It was just that like one day I was like, oh, the CD value has dropped again. Oh, well. And the exchange rate changed or whatever it was. But it was interesting to me that there was an expanding gap between the people who had money and the people who didn't have money. And people talk a lot about that here in America, that like the middle class is just getting more and more like divided between the people who have money and the people who don't. And it was just interesting to kind of see it at a very, very quick timeline in Ghana, as opposed to here where inflation is supposedly is regulated. I don't really understand how it's regulated, but I know it is.
Right.
But yeah, by the time, just in the 2 years span that I was there, it went from a 2-to-1 ratio to a 5-to-1 ratio.
Wow.
And so I was just like, I was baffled that like the last few weeks there, it was tumbling pretty quickly.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Just how even over that relatively short span of time, you were able to witness firsthand the effects of that.
Yeah. And what's funny is the people that I knew that were So like I was mainly like in the jungle area. Those people had no idea what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
They only knew that things were getting more expensive. That it took more of their dollars, their paper money to buy specific thing. They didn't understand the systems, and that was a huge disadvantage to them. And so something like Bitcoin is really good for those kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's really interesting to think about how just how this is going to affect things on a global scale, which is not something I've really looked into a lot, to be honest. But
yeah, me neither. I mean, but hey, it is coming.
yeah,
So the really cool thing is recently PayPal has announced that, you know, starting this year with a few users or different areas, but really starting early next year, people will be able to pay Bitcoin for products and services that you use PayPal for. So
yeah,
like on
and I think that's
eBay,
yeah,
on like at the grocery store, even if they accept PayPal.
yeah,
Like
and I think that's
it's
awesome. And I think even there's even some of the the institutions like Coinbase or some of the other services you can use to purchase crypto, they're offering something similar. You can get yourself, a Visa through this crypto company,
nice.
but you can pay for that. It's treated the same as any other Visa. So yeah, it's like, I guess in a sense, you could basically be using your crypto to buy your groceries or
Yeah.
whatever else you're doing throughout your day.
Yeah, that's a good idea. This is a small tangent. If you're interested in getting more into cryptocurrency, there's a link in the description for a referral for Coinbase, which is probably one of the more known and popular places you can trade cryptocurrency and use it, like how Eric's talking about. So if you do want to like get involved with cryptocurrency and like have the key and like own it and trade it, that's where you can get it. And the referral will, you know, help Eric out and help you out because you both kind of, get some benefits. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's all we kind of had for today. Does that kind of wrap it up for you too, Eric?
I think so. Yeah. I'd say that pretty much wraps it up.
Cool. Well, like we always do, we want to recommend something that we've been reading or listening to or watching. This week, we have both gotten out of school, so we're on winter break, and so we've been reading a lot, or at least I have. I started reading Orson Scott Card, the Ender's Game series. I'm on Ender in Exile, and if you guys like science fiction, these books are seriously one of the best.
Yeah, I've only read the first myself, but yeah, it's a great book. I'd recommend that as well. And then the book that I had that I wanted to recommend is George Orwell's 1984. It's just a great book. If you've never heard anything about it, it's sort of this dystopian society where there's this like sort of unseen entity called Big Brother that just like watches over all the people. It's kind of this like all-knowing, all-seeing person thing. The people are controlled by the thought police, so they're not even able to have independent thought, let alone the way they act and dress. Like everybody dresses the same, they act the same, and they're really afraid to even have individual thoughts of their own. It's just a really kind of scary, but it's a really interesting book.
Yeah. I wish Audible was a sponsor because I listened to it as an audiobook last year, and it was great. Like it was, it's kind of it's kind of scary sometimes when you think about it as a whole. When you're listening to it, the storyline keeps you like invested in stuff, and you don't always see the bigger picture, but you kind of try and relate it to what you see in your own life, and it's kind of it's interesting for sure. So I'd recommend that one too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, really anything by George Orwell. Something I really like about George Orwell is like all of his stories were sort of inspired by something happening in the real world. So like in 1984 or in Animal Farm that he wrote, they were both sort of modeled after like Stalinist government in Russia at the time.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, please find a place where you can review it at, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, or, follow us on Facebook or Twitter. But yeah, we will catch you on the next one.